wanted to also point to some of the things that we have for you. Appointments, you can make an appointment online with us and come in and talk about any aspect of teaching and learning that you are interested in. You can also practice teaching demonstrations if one of those is coming up for you. If you need teaching resources, come and talk with us. We may have them or help you build them. Our flagship program is the Certificate in College Teaching. 2 courses which are free to CGU students. And if you're alumni, you pay $50 a course, and that gives you the certificate. CGU Ethical Pedagogy Community is something we're very excited about. It has just only started. We haven't formally even launched it yet, but it exists. Check it out on the website. It's a LinkedIn group. And what we hope to do here is to start conversations, networks, so we can share and help with each other, because teaching should never be an isolated activity. It's always good to have a community. And do follow us on social media. We have a Twitter and Instagram, and we share the Facebook with the CGU Academic Professional Development. So like, share, put it out to your networks, and support the conversation that we want to really start getting into with everybody out there. So that's just sort of the PFF stuff. Now, let's go on to our goals for today. So there are 3 things I want to do. One is, what do we mean? So what is it? What's productive struggle? Why? Of course, we always look at the why. So why is it so powerful? Right? And once we know why it's so powerful, we always want to know, so how can I do it tomorrow in my classroom? Right? How can I bring it into my teaching? So that's what we are going to explore. So let's start with this. Take a moment to think what the word struggle brings to your mind, right? Recall a time in schooling experiences when you really enjoyed struggling. And also cast your mind back to non-school experiences where struggle was a lot of fun, right? So when was struggle good? I'm going to pause for a minute. Just think to yourself. Very happy if you want to share anything on chat, but you don't have to. Struggle is a very interesting word. And I'm curious as to whether, as we go through the slides, we'll come back to this notion of, did we enjoy it and why do we enjoy it sometimes? And why do we not enjoy it sometimes, right? So I'm going to go on. Keep thinking about this. And so I want to frame struggle like this. I love this quote. Very true. Struggle can either empower our students to become who they are, right? To use their voice, to achieve things. Or, depending on how we set up the conditions in our classroom, struggle can silence students. So, yes, and I'm seeing some of the ideas in chat. Creativity does very much come from struggle. And unfortunately, in the world of education, or rather I call it schooling, it does have a negative connotation. And that's what we want to explore today, right? Is a struggle a challenge above your skill set? Often it is. But how come sometimes we can stretch and other times we just kind of curl up, right? And what we're trying to do is how we can create the conditions, right? And this quote I like because it talks about the conditions teachers set. It's the critical difference between struggle that's negative and creative struggle, productive struggle, and the struggle that lets you learn. Kajal sharing, she had many interesting topics to work on, struggled with presenting in front of the class, and raising this question of struggle often comes with anxiety. So what are the conditions we can set to reduce it? I also want to point to the picture I'm using. I'm going to be using this picture a few times today, and the idea of struggle as this precarious balance, right? In order to stay in that position, there is constant struggling in the muscles and in the body positions to try to keep that beautiful, beautiful position of balance. And it's both the brain, the cognition, the thinking part of yourself, and the emotional part of yourself. They come together. So, you know, when you talk about the negative connotations, when you talk about anxiety, that's that emotional piece coming in. So this is kind of our big frame for struggle. And I love to start with pictures. So this is all about struggle. And struggle, one of the things we want to realize about struggle, really importantly, is that it is one of the most natural things and necessary things in any kind of learning. So if you ever learn to ride a bike or play a game, explore a toy and figure out why it works, skateboard, balance on a fence, and you can think of many, many, many more things you did as a child. Learning to talk, right? Learning to walk. It was all struggle. And it was not always full of anxiety. It was full of production, creativity, finding, exploring, discovery, joy, fun, right? How many times have we fallen again and again learning to skateboard, but no, I want to do it again because I'm going to get it. A picture I didn't put here, but which I was thinking of a lot, was gaming. Gaming is always a struggle, and we get so fixated on gaming if you get into video games, right? So how come kids get into video games and they struggle from one level to the next, but it's very negative in a learning space, right? So what are we doing in school to create anxiety? So these are sort of icons for me of the naturalness and the fun of struggle. And we go from that to this. So this is struggle when it is, almost dangerous. When we're being judged and measured, and there is a lot of anxiety about the outcomes. Where maybe the challenge is way above your skill set and nobody set you up with a process to get there, right? Too much of a stretch. So this is the difference that we want to explore. How can we get the former and avoid this? So before we get into the how, let's understand the mechanics of it. Like, let's define it. Why is it so powerful in supporting learning? So here's a definition. Learning as problem finding and problem solving. How does that connect with your sense of what learning has been in your own experiences? Is learning problem finding and problem solving, has that been the case in your life? And that's a very important question to think about, right? How do we make it so? And there are three pieces to it. Struggle when it's intentionally presented as exploration and discovery. Struggle as a necessary process. It's natural, normal, typical, expected for mastery. Struggle is not a strange, bad thing that happens to us. Struggle as an open way to do something. There's only one way to struggle. That's not good struggle, right? We struggle in different ways. You try to walk that fence. Somebody might try it like this child is doing. Somebody else may have a friend helping. Somebody else might first crawl along before they stand. There's so many ways to master something. So these are sort of three necessary ingredients for struggle, and it's one way of looking at productive struggle. Here's another way. Some of you know this, Vygotsky's zone of proximal development, the ZPD. And this is the same as productive struggle. So I'll take you quickly through this diagram. And we'll come to the middle zone, but the extreme. So you have this axis where you're talking about the level of challenge of a task. And Rachel had said, challenge above my skill set. And then on this axis, we're talking about the level of competence and self-efficacy and, you know, feeling that I can. And we balance between the two. Now, one of the things to remember when it comes to teaching is often, much more so than not, it is the learner's perceived sense of ability and perceived sense of challenge, right? So in this challenge space, if the learner thinks, and this is where your own self perception and sense of self and all your history can start playing in, right? If the learner thinks that this challenge is crazy high, now I can't do it, it's beyond me, it's impossible, I'm so afraid of failing, or the learner's just exhausted, they were up all night at a job, or they're just so frustrated because nothing is clear to them, then it is a challenge that is seen as beyond the ability level. The challenge is too high, right? So sometimes it's not the actual task, it is the experience and the background and the perception of it that comes into play. On the horizontal scale axis, you're looking at learners who might feel that, oh, this is so easy. It's too easy. Maybe they don't see the challenge. Maybe the challenge is really dumbed down and too simple. So they're comfortable, but kind of like no fun, right? There isn't any stretch. And you actually can get bored and disengaged, like, this is meaningless. I don't want to do this. So those are the extremes. That the sweet spot is right here. It's just a little beyond your ability, all right? We call it the stretch space. There are people around to help you, teachers, peers, there's a community. Someone has made the challenge seem very achievable. And we'll get into all those techniques in a while. How do you make the challenge seem like, yep, I can't do it yet, but you know, yet I can eventually. What about the feelings that come into the struggle, the positive emotions, the excitement, the joy in learning, playfulness, creativity? All of these contribute to the learner arriving in this middle space and being in that zone of proximal development, which is also known as the productive struggle space. So, you know, start thinking already, what have you seen that cause students to move out of the zone of proximal development, to think that the challenge is too high, or think that the challenge is too low? What causes people to drop out of engagement with the challenge, right? We'll be getting to that, but start thinking about it. Feel free to share your ideas as we go. This is just pretty much the same thing, but with the added elements of the kinds of large strategies that keep people in the zone of proximal development. So the foundations, support and a celebration of struggle. If I feel someone has got my back, they have clarified what the steps are, and they really kind of make struggle a good thing. It's fun and important. On the other side of that, balancing that, is that someone has made struggle the normal thing in this space. Of course, struggle is there. Everybody does it. And this notion of safe fail, something we use in PFF. Many people want a fail-safe method. You know, it's going to work. But you can flip that on its head and say, what is this? What about a safe fail method? That it's safe to explore, fall flat on your face and get up again, and then everyone's going to chip in and troubleshoot it, right? Safe fail. And then those two things connected with meaningful goals. Why are we doing this exercise? Does it make sense to me as a learner? And holding high expectations. And that's a very tricky phrase, because high expectations sometimes is making it so hard because I'm holding high standards. But high expectations without these things in the foundations is not going to cut it, right? Then that'll just be harshness. So if you want rigor and you need the challenge, that is productive struggle, and you have to set up the conditions for it. Right. So I hope this model is a good, when you get the slides, a nice framework to just shortcut to thinking about where's my productive challenge for my students. So what breaks productive struggle? Now that you've seen the model for productive struggle, do you want to make some guesses? Right. I'm going to pause for a few moments and make a guess about what you think in your teaching you've experienced and teaching that you've seen, observed, that might break or block productive struggle. You can make your own notes in your space, but if you want to share, feel free. Yeah, language is one, right? And that's either the meaninglessness of it, I don't get the language, or the beyond my ability because the target language is not there yet. Yeah, definitely. Yes, all the emotional things around lack of self-confidence, restrictions. Yes, when there is a very tight way to do anything, then your creativity in how you might approach a struggle and your autonomy to struggle, your sense of, I got this, maybe I'll try it this way. Or can I try it the other way? But if there's so many restrictions, then yeah, it will break or block productive struggle. Good one. Fear of the instructor. You see how much the emotional side comes in. Yeah. You might admire them so much. And that's a really interesting one that Janice is sharing. Sometimes you fear the instructor because you're just terrified of them, right? Sometimes you fear the instructor because you don't want to let them down. Oh my gosh, I admire this person and they might think I'm not great. They might think I'm stupid. Many students. Yeah, peer pressure, Virginia, definitely. In a peer pressure, so interesting. In a competitive space, yeah. What will my classmates think if I try this and it's just stupid, right? Because we always judge it as stupid, not it didn't work. It didn't work is the objective description. It's so silly is our emotional description. So yeah, peer pressure, peer competition, peer comparison, peer judgment, all of that emotional stuff. So when you look at just a few things we've had time to share, so much of it is emotional. And that's something to remember as we go into the methods or the strategies, that the cognition and the emotion are so interconnected in creating this beautiful dynamic balance of productive struggle. So I'm going to share with you, there's so many more, but I thought we have time to look at 4 big areas. And you've, in your sharing on chat, you've sort of alluded to many of these already, right? Rigidity, high stakes, not acknowledging and not supporting struggle. So we'll take a look at all 4 of these, a bit more detail. Now, I think I've pretty much mentioned rigidity a few times, one size fitting all. It's sometimes difficult not to be rigid. If you teach writing, as I've done, and everybody says, the department or whatever, you have to write the 5-paragraph essay. And that's only one way to write the essay. You need to have, your opening statement, you have to have a thesis statement, you have to have argument, etc., etc. And we do five paragraph essays in a semester. And this is a true example. And one day the teacher sat down and said, what's with the magic number 5? They should learn a 5-paragraph essay because they're going to need it in the other classes. But could they also write a blog post? Couldn't they do a video argument? Couldn't they make an ad, right? Couldn't we give them some choices so that they struggle with different aspects of writing in a way that is meaningful to them? So rigidity can be overcome even when the discipline is a little prescriptive about what the thing is that they have to do. Right. Rigidity is also ignoring the plurality of student context, their lives, their histories. So Friday night, 11:59 is your deadline. No exceptions. Well, the student who has a part-time job and is working, a student who is a parent, a student who is very involved, say, in a particular program in college, maybe they're having rehearsals. They can't all do Friday night at 11:59. Could you have a stretched deadline? Could you have some flexibility, right? So this rigidity can be unpacked into the kinds of flexibility. One, autonomy, options that we can give our students. High stakes. I just realized that my slides uploaded as all number 1. Sorry about that. There should be 1, 2, 3, 4. High stakes. This one I think we understand because many of us have been through this, haven't we? If a mistake is going to cost you, it's going to cost your grade. Every draft, if you don't do well, is going to cost your final grade something. If it's going to be costly on your confidence and self-esteem because you get these awful comments back, because there is some kind of judgment happening and you feel judged, those are going to reduce the propensity or the desire to struggle. Let me just do what the teacher wants and then I'll be fine, right? When you have high stakes, struggle is seen as an indication of a lack of ability. Even if you don't think so, the student will think so. And the student will say things like, well, if I'm smart, I shouldn't have to struggle. And the assumption that rigor is challenge, but without any balance of support, any supporting structures or scaffolding. So high stakes is a very, very quick way to end productive challenge completely. When struggle is not acknowledged and supported, this is something that we forget to do. In our hurry to teach, we often forget to have a conversation and help students see that struggle is fine. And that students end up struggling in isolation because they don't want to reveal that they're struggling. They don't say, I'm having trouble solving this problem here, right? Because that is an admission of lack of ability because we haven't framed struggle for them. Struggle is not supported through clarity and scaffolding, so they don't know why they're doing the work. And there's no formative feedback. No scaffolding, no saying, let's sit down and do some peer review and see where the gaps are. Let's take a look at all your strengths in doing this while we look at your gaps. So positive formative feedback, constructive formative feedback. Or completely the other way, struggle is not supported because it's totally taken away. Let's make it easy. You just do these 10 steps and it'll be okay, right? So we're telling them exactly how to get it right. And that doesn't work. One of the things I want to say at this point is most of the research on productive struggle comes from the discipline of math. So if there's anybody here who teaches mathematics, this has come out of that field more than any other field. Some of it has come out of writing, but because in mathematics, struggle is mathematics is usually very high stakes. There's one answer, and this struggle is completely removed thing happens a lot. We show how to do the problem set. Then we have them repeat, and do a bunch of problem sets. There is very little struggle there, and therefore there is very little learning there. In math, when they've done it the other way, here's a problem, let's try and figure it out together, the learning goes a lot deeper. So we'll get into that when we come to the strategies. I'm going to pause just for a second to give you time to, if this is a lot, just take it in. If you have any thoughts, questions, put that into the chat, and then I'll move on to the strategies. Okay, so we have defined it. We have a model for it. We know how struggle can be, productive struggle is broken. And now let's take a look at, oh, I forgot I had this slide, but we're going to take a look at strategies. So this is taken from some of the research papers out there of how students talk about struggle. And you can see the conditioning to not like it. As long as I know what's going to be tested, I'm pretty much fine with taking a math class. If I had to work so hard to get a good grade, I'm probably not good enough to major in this subject. That is so sad. Right? This student actually got an A after working very, very hard. But all that told her was, don't major in math. You don't have what it takes. When I understood math, I loved it. But when I was confused and lost, I hated it. Or she's so smart. She gets things so fast. Right? The idea that being smart is not struggling. You're just going to get it like that. So these are the kinds of narratives that are embodied in our students and also in us. So being intentional about struggle is a really good thing to start cultivating. So back to this diagram. So this is the frame, and we want to look at how these things can happen in class. So let's take a look. I guess 4 is a magic number today. 4 strategies for creating productive struggle. Problem solve before the answer, finding an answer. Productive pathways, that's all about scaffolding. Make it meaningful. And this really, really important piece, metacognition of struggle, right? So we'll take it one at a time. So here, I'm just going to show you some examples here. The productive struggle is try it, figure it out, problem solve, practice, right? And on the right, you have the performance-based approach. I show you, you do. Very transmission-based. And if you look at this, these on the right are what we often find time and time again in classrooms, right? An essay, take a quiz, calculate something, read an article for class. But if we move it into the productive struggle place, you're actually going to be doing, as a bonus, all these different levels of thought, which are much higher order thinking and skill building, capacity building. Don't write an essay yet. First, let's analyze an essay. Find the argument structure of this really good essay that you found. Troubleshoot an argument. Let's take a look at a bunch of arguments with fallacies and try to identify why it doesn't work. Problem solving first. Then, let's write it. What are some good questions for a quiz? Let students, many professors I know do this. They don't set the quiz, they get the students to come up with the quiz questions. So problem solving the topic by coming up with good questions. Then you might use it in a quiz. Or statistics. What could go wrong in a correlation? Let's talk about it, right? What are the best practices for regression analysis? What do y'all know? Go find out. Let's talk about it. Then they can do the problem sets. Reverse outline an article and reveal the author's tactics and text structure. Don't just read the article for class. Tell us what the author was trying to do and what their moves were. That really gets into the deep structure of reading because you're analyzing, questioning, and evaluating as you go. So, when we have time for questions, if there are particular things in the subjects you're teaching, definitely we can talk about, how do you go from just the performance to the productive struggle? Practice, yes. Praxis, the idea of connecting the thought to the work, really solidifies the learning, and that's really part of productive struggle. Now, if you don't put the scaffolding and the idea struggle is good in there, they may disengage from practicing this stuff because it's just going to seem dangerous, not safe, right? So you want a safe, fail space to do this kind of productive struggle. So problem-solving approaches to teaching are more likely to get you to productive struggle. So rephrasing everything, a task as a problem first. The pathways, right? So what are we disrupting when we create pathways? We're disrupting a punitive system, punitive inequities like harshness, punishments, high stakes, and it also disrupts systemic inequities like students' lives, their identities, their histories, their assets that are not recognized in school. When we create clear pathways, there is so much more of a chance for all that to come in. So scaffolding, which many of us already know about, are there clear instructions and are there stages of work? And, we can granulate that so much more. Is there enough space and time for those stages in work? How tight, remember rigidity, how open and flexible is the scaffolding that we provide? Removing isolation, peer teaching is one of the best things for the zone of proximal development or productive struggle. Peer collaboration where possible before working alone. You do want to get to the place where you're on your own and you're flying. That's great, right? But allowing sharing, group, pair work to say, this is a thorny little problem. Let's kind of go at it as a group, right? And that makes it also a little bit more playful and game-like, right? And the safe fail pieces. Do we have time for input, for you to give feedback, for peers to give feedback? Can they clarify? And do we celebrate these milestones as we go? So the low or no stakes formative feedback. A draft shouldn't count for points. Or if it does for so few points, it's not going to hurt the final. Common sense, right? You haven't mastered it yet, so why should you be judged at that point? And very, very important with this creates a dilemma for us. Time to struggle and space to struggle. Because we then are caught our personal struggle as teachers, but there's so much to teach. I got to put in all this content. Right? And so we have the dilemma, our struggle of coverage versus learning. Age-old struggle, but it's really important to give this a lot of reflection and intention. Like, I have to make time and space for struggle so that the learning happens, because otherwise, what's the point of all that content if the learning doesn't really happen? And the meaningfulness, why are we doing this? What are the goals? Are the goals meaningful to students? So why are we writing a 5-paragraph essay, right? Making that clear to them, how they might use it in a job, being able to have a clear thesis, being able to write a report where the key points are all very clear and they're supported with evidence, helping students see why it's meaningful. And actually, in my own practice, I would ask them to struggle with that. I would say, figure out why this task is so important for us to do in this class. Like, why are we doing this? Shouldn't be busy work. And they problem solve that. They come up with the meanings that are meaningful to them. And of course, student autonomy and flexibility. We've talked about this in a few different places. And you see how this keeps coming back again and again, right? Giving people options and choices and allowing some autonomy to come in. And these things here, this is what we are giving our students when we make struggle meaningful: purpose, goal, clarity, right? Communication, autonomy, flexibility, and you get this beautiful combination of rigor and safety happening. And this is the metacognition one. How do we frame struggle as positive? One of the things we want to remember is When students come to us at college level, and actually by middle school, they're there already. They've already been taught to think about struggle as negative and fearful and all those things. So having explicit conversations and unpacking that word, you're going to teach that struggle is positive. Having community norms and commitments actually create some protocols for struggling, right? How do you say, I don't know? Is there a way to signal it? Asking questions, telling your students to help each other. So these become explicit community norms so that you can point to it from time to time and say, hey, remember, one of our norms is offer help if you can, so please go ahead and do that, right? And taking pride in struggle. I know I haven't seen this in a school space, but I've seen it like in the creative space in Pomona, where they have the pride board for great fails, and people can take pictures of their projects that bombed and then put it up there. They're like, yep, this failed. And just making it fun and playful, right? And so you start losing the fear of struggle. And for you in the class, documenting the process, sitting down from time to time and say, so we just looked at, this theory. What were the sticky areas and how did we address them? So it's not like, tell me what you don't know and I will answer your questions, but how did we problem solve that? What did we discover? So these kinds of conversations bring in a very different culture into the classroom, right? And building metacognition as positive, as on this idea of struggle is positive. So in addition to how it helps people learn, I want to end here with other benefits. This is what students, there's more, but I thought these 6 ones are huge. This is what we foster in students. If you're running a team, an organization, this is what we also foster. If you know how to create the conditions, that quote right at the beginning, teachers create a condition for productive struggle. And borrowing that phrase, rising skills, from Brene Brown, who talks about this persistence that students can have. Autonomy, sense of self-efficacy, feeling that, wow, I mastered something. Learning how to learn, because we're always looking at that metacognitive piece. Self-management, when you give autonomy and self-efficacy and scaffold the process, people learn, our students learn to balance and manage themselves. Growth mindset, scaffolding, formative feedback, you're really shifting people into a very growth mindset space where learning is effort and feedback, and they can easily say, yeah, I don't know it yet. And then, of course, collaboration skills, because if productive struggle is done together rather than alone as much as possible, they also learn to collaborate. So we have a good amount of time for ideas, questions. And, if you would like to share in chat, because that will be lovely to share with each other, put your questions and ideas there. But I'm really also hoping, what will you take away with you from all this? If you remembered 1 or 2 things, and 1 or 2 things that you can go away and do, what would that be? I'm going to pause and just let this sit and have you think about it and share. And at this point, if you want to unmute your mic and jump in, you can, or you can just chat in chat, put it into chat.
Shamini, it's Melissa, and I was just going to jump in. I was going to ask you, do you think another approach is community building? Would that help with the helping with the struggle portion? Because I saw, solo attempt, peer review. Would community sort of come into play there?
Absolutely. And thank you for raising that. That is very much so. You can see, right, these different techniques, and then you think, well, classroom community. What does classroom community give us? The collaboration, the let's help each other. They're happier to sit together in a group because they already know each other, right? And you've created a brave and safe space by first establishing community in your classroom. And then when you say, all right, everybody, I have this problem, and here's the scenario. Let's see if we can solve this. They're going to be able to talk to each other better, easier. So yes, community as a foundational piece of meaningful struggle is very important. Thank you. Yeah, very good one.
Shamini, can I just have a follow-up question on
Please
that?
do. Yeah.
Hi. So I personally got into a situation before that, because I took class in another school. So I talked to the professor saying like, okay, this is my first time taking class in this school. I don't know what regulations you have, what expectations you have. So he didn't give me much. But then in midterm, I got my grade was seriously affected because the way I was writing was not as explicit as how they used to be.
Mm,
So that brought me lots of struggle, but not in a positive way. So
no.
I talked to them again. I was like, sorry, I didn't know you need to write in this specific way. And
Mm,
then they told me like, I don't know what you don't know if you don't tell me. But it's like, I don't know what I don't
mm,
know to tell you.
mm.
So in
So
that dilemma,
true.
yeah, there was like the communication problem we just mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
How do we solve that?
Okay, that's a big one. Um, on the student side, and this is where, as educators, we want to think about how unfair it is to the student, because I don't know what you don't know is true in one way, but the student is also in the situation of I don't know what I don't know. And of the two people in that scenario, I'm sorry, the faculty member, it's on me as the faculty member, right, as the teacher. Now, what can you do in that situation as a student is, now if you have this community with us, hopefully you have friends with community, is to, I think it's just putting too much on the student to have to figure it all out if this faculty member isn't clear. But let's say another time when you are in that situation, you have one advantage. You already have the thought, I don't know what I don't know. And I actually tell my students that there are many things we don't know that we don't know. So how do we first find that out? And sometimes it is going to that first, making a meeting with the professor and say, could you, and going over, if they haven't spelled it out in the syllabus, this is why we need to, that point about how clear and how meaningful are our expectations and our guidance and our instructions. If it's not there, sadly, then the student has to go and ask the professor, which is a difficult thing to do. Could you break down these instructions? Because I really don't know what it is I might be missing. And I want to be very, very clear. But now I feel like I'm counseling. I'm counseling you. And I shouldn't, right? But that's so, that's where a student is left. And so, like you, the many, many students who have struggled like this, and the challenge was the struggle was not productive if you didn't know what the instructions and expectations were. It was not productive for you. This was a challenge that was punitive, right? And so I don't know if that really addresses the question you have, like what can the student do? I certainly know what the teacher should do. If that teacher and I were having a conversation, and I would say, let's look at the instructions you're giving people. Let's look at the feedback before the final. Like, did you have a moment of feedback before the final draft? And so that teacher needs to kind of build those structures in order to make the struggle productive. So think about that, and do come back with a follow-up. And while you're thinking, I'm also going to look at scaffolding, yes, giving people a little bit of a challenge and only what's manageable, but without being afraid of really saying, okay, got this. You know how video games, like, yeah, I'm going to go to the next level now. But scaffolding, 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 then that level is fine. It becomes manageable. So I'm glad Rachel raised that thing about scaffolding and challenge, because what's manageable is, to me, determined by how much scaffolding there is. So when I used to teach theater, acting a particular character part could seem manageable or not manageable. But if I scaffolded it right, I have them do it quietly with a partner. I give them script coaching. I give them practice in the mirror. I give them record yourself. Pretty tough challenges are manageable, right? And that's how you also make it manageable for all. I had this one student who was like, I got Lady Macbeth, no problem, and the other students petrified. But with all those different scaffolding places and all the formative feedback along the way, it became manageable for most of them, right? So good point. Yes, clear instructions, that's the same. You know, you see scaffolding is so important. So Amay is talking about breaking work into stages. And speaking of resources, I'm not sure I'm saying your name right. I have a friend whose name is spelled like that. It's Amay. Please correct me if it's wrong.
You're actually saying it the right way because it's French, but
yeah.
I'm so used to everyone saying Amy because I'm
Amy.
American, and that's just like, yeah. So,
okay. Well, I was told how to pronounce it. So, but we do have resources on scaffolding and so on. So send us an email, right? Make an appointment, or just email me or Shelby, and we can do that. And that's one of the things PFF does, that we have resources. They may not be a perfect match, but then you can adapt it. You don't have to start with zero.
Right? Great, thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing this article. So if everybody wants to click on it, I'll click on that and add it to the resources for this set of slides. And I'll show you the resources in a minute. Coming up with quiz questions. I'm glad somebody liked that. That's really useful. Coming up with anything. Coming up with, it could be a quiz. It could be, we want to build a project. Why don't we set the parameters? You all think about what would be a really good project to do next week, right? So helping students co-create the work with you is problem finding, which is a big part of creative development as well, right? Learning to think about what could become the parameters and guidelines, etc. Parental approval, this is interesting. Yeah. In school, in college, we may not see it so much, but it's very present, depending on the students, depending on culture, depending on scholarships, right? So they create high stakes, whether it's parental expectations and approval, whether it's a scholarship that depends on the A. So here's a challenge for us. Create the struggle, lower the stakes for the struggle so that we can get everybody to that high point of achievement that will be mind-blowing for the parents and great for the scholarship, right? So framing the struggle is also with families to say that in this workspace, we are going to be making all kinds of experiments. So if you have an opportunity to, if you're working in the K-12 system, this is the kind of conversation that you have with parents on Parents' Night. This is a newsletter you send back to them to say, we're doing a lot of discovery and exploration. You tell them why it's important. But their approval and fear of the grade the desire for their children to have a good grade is something we can respect. And when we respect that, we can work with parents to say, it's not an either or. It's not low stakes, no quality, and no achievement. It is low stakes to get the process going. And then this high rigor to get the achievement and the mastery happening, right? So it can be a bit of both. No, in fact, actually, I shouldn't say it can be a bit of both. It is both. The struggle leads to achievement. The struggle leads to high performance, right? It's not a dumbing down of the performance. The productive struggle is to stretch people. I'm glad someone likes say fail. Okay, and I'm watching the time, and we have 4 minutes. I'm just going to quickly show you, there are some resources here that you can dig into when you get the slides, and I will also add the links people have shared so that we have all of it together. And this is a very interesting talk, and while it is about mathematics, the way this teacher talks about productive struggle and exploring it is very useful. So have a listen. It's a short little talk. Okay. I'm going to stop sharing now just so we can say goodbye. I'm still going to be here for a few minutes if anyone has questions or just wants to chat for a bit. I'm going to be here for a while. So, but this webinar is formally over. So come back. We hope to see you in the next webinar, next few webinars. So come back and share your ideas, pick up ideas, and become a community. Thanks for coming and have a great evening.
Thank you.